The house was quiet, too quiet for a summer evening in Oak Park, Illinois. The neighborhood around Winona Avenue slept peacefully, unaware that inside a modest brick home, one of the most feared and fascinating figures in organized crime was taking his last breaths. The smell of frying sausage still lingered in the kitchen. It was a meal that would never be finished, a final, strangely domestic detail in the life of Sam Giancana, a man who once dined with celebrities, made deals with spies, and ruled Chicago from the shadows. When the shots rang out, they echoed like punctuation marks at the end of a life story that seemed too wild to be real. Sam lay face down in his own basement, a pool of blood spreading slowly beneath him, the red soaking into the cold concrete floor. 6 bullets had been fired. One hit him in the back of the head, a professional's shot meant to make sure there was no chance of survival. The others tore through him as he fell, as if someone wanted to send a message even in death: this man, this boss, would never rise again. Outside, the night remained calm. The neighbors did not hear, or perhaps they simply pretended not to. In Chicago, some silences are deliberate. This is where our story begins, at the end. The mystery of who killed Sam Giancana has haunted historians, journalists, and true crime enthusiasts for decades. Was it the mafia, silencing a man who knew too much? Was it the CIA, erasing a link to covert plots that could have shaken the U.S. government? Or was it something far more personal, an inside betrayal, a final settling of scores? To answer that, we must go back, far back, to the days when Sam Giancana was not yet the feared Mooney or the Chicago outfit's boss, but simply Salvatore, a wiry kid growing up in a rough immigrant neighborhood. Imagine Chicago in the early 1900s, horse-drawn carts clattering over cobblestones, smoke rising from factory chimneys, children darting through alleys barefoot, and the constant hum of many languages blending together: Italian, Polish, Irish. Life was hard, and the rules of survival were simple: you either fought, or you were crushed. In this world, young Sam was learning fast. He had a temper that could flare like a match, and a mind that was always calculating, always looking for an angle. People would one day call him brilliant, cunning, dangerous. But in these early days, he was just another boy trying to stay one step ahead of hunger and trouble. There is something strangely poetic about starting with the quiet of death when telling the story of a man whose life was anything but quiet. Sam Giancana lived loudly, even if most of what he did stayed in the shadows. He rose from nothing, seized power in a city where gangsters ruled, and built a criminal empire that stretched from Chicago to Las Vegas to Havana. He was a man of contradictions, violent yet charming, ruthless yet oddly loyal to his friends, a man who could order a killing with a nod and then go home to eat dinner with his family. The more you learn about him, the harder it becomes to separate fact from legend, truth from myth. And perhaps that is what makes this story so captivating. It is not just a tale of crime and violence. It is also a tale of ambition, betrayal, politics, and secrets that reach the highest levels of government. At one point, Sam Giancana was said to have been involved in CIA plots to assassinate Fidel Castro, a bizarre partnership between gangsters and spies. He brushed shoulders with Hollywood stars, allegedly helped elect a president, and yet, in the end, he died alone in his basement, gunned down like so many others before him. Power can protect you for a while, but in the world Giancana lived in, it never protects you forever. As you settle into this story, allow yourself to be drawn into the mood of the era. Picture the smoky bars where deals were made, the neon lights of Las Vegas where the outfit laundered its fortunes, the quiet backrooms where whispers decided who lived and who died. This will not be a rushed story. We will take our time, moving through the decades of Giancana's life like walking through a dimly lit museum, stopping at each moment, turning it over, examining the details. Every chapter of his life offers a clue to understanding not just how he lived, but why he died the way he did. Tonight, as you listen, you may find yourself feeling a strange sympathy for this man. It is easy to reduce mobsters to villains in black and white movies, but real life is never that simple. Giancana was a son, a lover, a friend, a father. He was also a murderer, an extortionist, a gambler on the grandest scale. His life was a balancing act between love and fear, respect and terror, loyalty and betrayal. And perhaps it is this complexity that still fascinates us, even as we drift toward sleep, decades after his murder. So let us step back through time. Let us walk the streets of Chicago as they were a century ago, smell the bread baking in Italian kitchens, hear the distant music of jazz spilling out from a bar, feel the tension as rival gangs fight for control. Somewhere in those streets, a boy named Salvatore is learning to survive, and in surviving, he is already becoming something more. The seeds of the man who would one day be called the Chicago Don are being planted. And as we move through his story, we will keep one eye on that quiet house in Oak Park, where his story ends, because the shadow of that basement will fall across every chapter that follows. Chicago, in the early 1900s, was a city alive with sound and struggle. The streets were lined with brick buildings, their windows fogged from the heat of stoves burning inside. Pushcarts crowded the corners, selling bread, fruit, and coal. The air smelled of smoke, horses, and lake wind drifting in from Michigan. In this restless city, in 1908, Salvatore Giancana was born to Sicilian immigrants, Antonio and Antonia Giancana. They had come to America chasing a dream of a better life, but the world they found was unforgiving. Their neighborhood, known as the Patch, was one of the poorest in Chicago, a patchwork of immigrants from Italy, Poland, and Ireland, all packed into tenement apartments where privacy was a luxury and hunger was a frequent visitor. Young Salvatore, called Sam by some neighbors, grew up in a house where money was always short, but pride was plentiful. His father worked as a pushcart peddler, selling fruit and vegetables door to door, while his mother cared for the family. The Patch was no place for the timid. Fistfights broke out in alleys, children learned to run fast to avoid trouble, and adults whispered about protection rackets and gang wars. Sam saw early on that those with power did not ask politely, they took what they wanted. Sam's childhood was not easy. He was small, wiry, and quick, with a temper that could flare in an instant. Other kids called him Mooney, short for Mooney Mad Sam, because of how quickly he could lose control when provoked. But that same fire made him dangerous even as a boy. He learned to fight not just with fists but with cunning. He would wait, watch, and strike when it mattered most. This knack for patience and precision would one day serve him well in the underworld. By the time he was a teenager, Sam had already developed a reputation on the streets. He could be funny and charming one minute, violent the next. He had a knack for drawing other boys to him, becoming a kind of natural leader among the young troublemakers. They stole fruit from pushcarts, ran numbers for gamblers, and acted as lookouts for older gangsters. Sam thrived in this environment. He was learning the rules of the street, which were often far different from the rules written in books or taught by teachers. School, for Sam, was never the center of his life. He attended only as much as he had to, often skipping classes to roam the neighborhood. Authority figures didn't impress him, priests, teachers, and even policemen seemed like obstacles rather than guides. What impressed Sam were the men who drove nice cars, wore sharp suits, and were feared by everyone. They were gangsters, and in their world, respect was measured not by grades but by the size of your reputation. Prohibition was beginning to reshape Chicago at this time, turning the city into a playground for organized crime. Bootleggers ran liquor from Canada, speakeasies popped up behind every corner store, and rival gangs fought bloody wars for control of territories. Sam, still just a teenager, saw opportunity everywhere. He started doing small jobs for the 42 Gang, a group of young Sicilian and Italian toughs who were known for their daring and recklessness. The 42s were the proving ground for future Chicago mobsters, a kind of unofficial farm team for the outfit. Sam's early jobs were simple, driving getaway cars, acting as a lookout, collecting payments. But he stood out. He was reliable, he stayed calm under pressure, and he seemed to have a natural sense for when things were about to go wrong. Older gangsters noticed him and began to trust him with bigger tasks. Soon he was involved in hijackings, robberies, and even the occasional beating of someone who refused to pay. The boy from the patch was becoming a man of the streets. At home, Sam's family saw a different side of him. He could be quiet, even respectful, with his mother, and he remained close to his siblings. He loved food, laughter, and the small comforts that life could offer. But he never spoke much about what he did when he left the house. His father disapproved of his growing reputation but could do little to stop him. Sam had tasted freedom, and the streets were teaching him lessons far more useful than anything found in a schoolbook. There is something deeply compelling about this stage of Giancana's life because it shows how environment shapes destiny. Sam was not born a boss. He was born into hardship, into a neighborhood where crime was often the only way to climb the social ladder. Each fight he survived, each job he pulled off, added a brick to the foundation of the man he would become. Listeners can almost see him, a lean teenager, cigarette dangling from his lips, standing on a corner with his friends, watching the world with sharp, calculating eyes. Even then, Sam was ambitious. He wanted more than to be just another street punk. He wanted respect, money, and the kind of power that made policemen nod politely and judges look the other way. The outfit, Chicago's powerful organized crime syndicate, was always watching for talent, and Sam was about to catch their eye. But that rise would come with a price. This is where the story deepens, where the boy from the patch steps into the world of real gangsters, men who play for keeps and who live by a code of silence. For Sam, there was no turning back. The next chapter of his life would test his loyalty, sharpen his instincts, and push him closer to becoming the man who would one day run Chicago's underworld. Somewhere in the patch, as night falls and the streetlights flicker on, Sam Giancana is dreaming bigger dreams, imagining a future where he is no longer running errands for other men but calling the shots himself. That dream, dangerous and intoxicating, would drive him for the rest of his life. The streets of Chicago in the late 1920s were a school for gangsters, and Sam Giancana was now one of its most promising students. The 42 Gang, his unofficial family, had become his world. This was no ordinary street gang. They were feared by the police, respected by the outfit, and envied by other neighborhood toughs. They were young, hungry, and bold, with a reputation for being willing to take on jobs too risky for older, more cautious criminals. For Sam, every day with them was a step deeper into the underworld. By now, Sam had perfected the art of being both invisible and unforgettable. To outsiders, he was just another wiry young man in a flat cap, leaning against a lamppost, whistling to himself. But those who knew him saw something different, a sharp mind, a short fuse, and a willingness to do what others hesitated to do. It was during these years that Sam earned his nickname, Mooney, not just for his quick temper, but for the strange glint in his eyes when anger overtook him. People learned quickly that when Sam's voice dropped to a quiet, icy tone, violence was not far behind. The 42 Gang specialized in hijackings and car thefts. Prohibition had made bootleg liquor the most valuable commodity in Chicago, and trucks carrying whiskey were prime targets. Sam's first real job was hijacking a truck loaded with Canadian rye. He remembered every detail for years afterward, the feel of the steering wheel under his hands as he blocked the road, the sound of breaking glass as the driver's side window shattered, the rush of adrenaline when the cargo was finally theirs. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the power. In that moment, Sam knew he was no longer just a boy from the patch. He was someone to be reckoned with. Small successes led to bigger jobs. Soon, Sam was trusted to plan operations, not just follow orders. He proved to be a natural strategist, capable of thinking several steps ahead. If a job went bad, he always had an escape plan. If police were tipped off, he had alibis ready. And if someone in the gang started talking too much, Sam was the one who handled it, quietly, efficiently, permanently. His first suspected murder happened during this period, though the details were never proven. What is known is that after that incident, Sam's reputation in the gang changed. He was no longer just Mooney, the hot-headed kid. He was Mooney, the man you didn't cross. The Chicago outfit had been watching. Tony Accardo, one of the outfit's most respected figures, kept tabs on promising young men, and Sam's name began to circulate. The outfit needed men who were reliable, men who could be trusted to follow orders and keep their mouths shut. Sam fit the profile perfectly. One night, he was called to meet an older member of the outfit in a dimly lit restaurant on the west side. It was not exactly an invitation, more of a test. Sam sat there, quiet, respectful, answering questions carefully. When he walked out of that meeting, he knew he was on his way to something bigger. But power always came with danger. The 42 gang was fearless, but fearlessness had its cost. Police raids were common, and prison was always a looming possibility. Sam was arrested several times during these years, usually for auto theft or bootlegging-related charges. Each time, he managed to avoid serious prison time, sometimes because witnesses changed their stories, other times because judges seemed strangely lenient. Sam was already learning that in Chicago, justice could be negotiated. The late-night streets were Sam's classroom. He learned how to tail a car without being noticed, how to shake a police tail by ducking into alleys, how to read the body language of men deciding whether to fight or flee. He also learned that violence, when used correctly, was a form of communication. A beating could send a message just as clearly as a letter. A killing could settle an argument permanently. These lessons hardened him, shaping the man who would later rule Chicago with both fear and charisma. One story from these years stands out. A rival gang had been muscling in on 42 gang territory, threatening to take over a lucrative bootlegging route. Sam was part of a team sent to straighten things out. The confrontation ended in a hail of bullets on a side street near Taylor Street. When the smoke cleared, 2 rivals were dead, and the message was clear: the 42 gang would not be pushed aside. It was this kind of bold action that made the outfit take the 42s seriously, and made Sam a rising star in their eyes. At home, the contrast between his public and private life grew sharper. He was still the dutiful son who sat at the family table, still the young man who kissed his mother's cheek before leaving the house. But there was something colder in him now, something harder. The street had given him purpose, and that purpose was survival through dominance. He was no longer just reacting to life, he was shaping it, bending it to his will. The 42 gang was, in many ways, a crucible. Some of its members would go on to become powerful mobsters, others would die young, and some would simply vanish, casualties of a life that chewed people up and spat them out. Sam survived, thrived, and learned. Each job, each fight, each narrow escape was a step toward a larger destiny. And destiny, it seemed, was calling. The outfit was preparing for a new era. The days of Al Capone were over, but Chicago was still a city where power could be taken if you were smart enough, ruthless enough, and patient enough. Sam had all 3 qualities. Soon, he would move beyond the world of teenage gangs and into the world of high-stakes rackets, where the money was bigger, the enemies deadlier, and the rewards intoxicating. The boy from the patch had become a man, a gangster with a name that made others nervous. The next chapter of his life would see him step out of the shadows of the 42 gang and into the outfit proper. It was a promotion of sorts, but also an invitation into a world where betrayal could come from anyone, at any time. As we follow Sam into this next stage, the tension rises, because every step closer to power also brought him one step closer to the danger that would one day consume him. Sam Giancana's days with the 42 gang were coming to an end, but not because he was slowing down, quite the opposite. He had caught the eye of the Chicago outfit, and that was the kind of attention that could change a man's life forever. The outfit was no street crew. It was an empire, the shadow government of Chicago, a network that stretched into politics, unions, gambling halls, and businesses legitimate enough to pass for honest. To join the outfit was to step into a new world, one where the stakes were higher, the rewards greater, and the mistakes far more fatal. By the late 1930s and early 1940s, Sam had proven himself reliable, loyal, and capable of doing what needed to be done without asking too many questions. Tony Accardo, then one of the most powerful men in the outfit, began giving him assignments. At first, these were low-level jobs, managing small gambling operations, shaking down bookmakers who were late on payments, acting as muscle when negotiations turned tense. But Sam handled these responsibilities with a mix of efficiency and flair. He wasn't just a tough guy. He was a thinker. He saw patterns where others saw chaos, and he understood that violence worked best when it was precise, not random. Chicago itself was changing. The Prohibition era was over, and with it, the wild bootlegging wars that had defined the city in Capone's day. The outfit had evolved. Instead of attracting unwanted attention with bloody gang wars, the new leadership preferred to keep things quiet, to make money without making headlines. Sam learned quickly that discretion was as important as brutality. He became a master of both. One of his first big responsibilities was overseeing policy operations, the illegal lottery games popular in black neighborhoods. Policy was a gold mine, and the outfit wanted full control. Sam was tasked with making sure everyone paid their share and that no independent operators tried to run their own games. This was delicate work. Policy kings like Ed Jones and his brothers were well-respected figures in their communities, and coming down too hard risked a backlash. Sam handled it with calculated diplomacy, some persuasion here, some intimidation there, and enough generosity to keep the money flowing without sparking rebellion. It was during this time that Sam began to show he could be more than just an enforcer, he could be a negotiator, even a diplomat when needed. But make no mistake, when persuasion failed, Sam had no hesitation in using force. There were shootings, beatings, and disappearances, the kinds of incidents that rarely made the newspapers but kept the outfit's grip ironclad. Sam's name began to circulate more and more in law enforcement files. FBI agents started noting his presence at meetings, his growing influence. They knew something was happening, even if they couldn't yet prove it. Sam's personal style also began to evolve. Gone were the flat caps and rough street clothes of his 42 gang days. Now he wore sharp suits, silk ties, and Italian shoes. He moved through nightclubs and restaurants with quiet confidence, always aware of who was watching, who was listening. People noticed when Sam entered a room, not because he made a scene, but because the atmosphere seemed to change. There was a weight to his presence, a sense that this was a man who could decide your fate with a single phone call. His relationship with Tony Accardo deepened. Accardo, known as Joe Batters for his own violent past, was grooming Sam for bigger things. He saw in Giancana someone who could bridge the gap between the street and the boardroom. A man who could speak the language of the tough guys but also think strategically about the future of the outfit. Under Accardo's mentorship, Sam learned how to read financial ledgers, how to manage complex gambling operations, and how to keep politicians in his pocket. The outfit's operations were expanding into Las Vegas during this period, skimming profits from casinos and using the desert city as a money-laundering paradise. Sam wasn't yet running Vegas operations, but he was watching, learning, taking notes. He understood that the future of organized crime wasn't just in Chicago's alleys, it was in the glittering neon lights of Nevada, where the money could be counted in millions, not thousands. But even as Sam's star was rising, danger was never far away. Rival gangs still existed, federal investigations were always a threat, and internal politics within the outfit could be deadly. One wrong word, one wrong move, and Sam could find himself on the wrong side of a power struggle. He knew this and acted accordingly, keeping his circle tight, his loyalties clear, and his ambitions carefully measured. What made Sam different from so many others was his ability to inspire loyalty. Men followed him not just because they were afraid of him, but because he made them believe he could lead them to something bigger. He took care of his people, rewarded them when they did well, and protected them when trouble came. This loyalty would one day make him a powerful boss, but it would also make him dangerous to those above him who feared what a man like Sam might become. Chicago's outfit had long mastered the art of staying in the shadows, but as Sam's influence grew, so did the attention. Police tried repeatedly to tie him to murders and racketeering, but witnesses had a way of disappearing or suddenly forgetting what they had seen. The legend of Sam Giancana was taking shape, a man who always seemed one step ahead, a man who could not be touched. By the mid-1940s, Sam was no longer just another soldier in the outfit. He was a rising star, a man with a reputation for being both effective and loyal. His territory grew, his earnings grew, and his confidence grew. The next step would be leadership, and with it, real power. But power has a way of making enemies, and some of the men around Sam were beginning to watch him with wary eyes. In the quiet moments, perhaps over a late-night drink or while driving home down empty Chicago streets, Sam must have thought about how far he had come. From a barefoot boy in the patch to a man whose name made other gangsters nod with respect, he had climbed a ladder that had claimed many lives along the way. But he was not done climbing. The top of the outfit was within sight, and Sam intended to reach it. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that each step closer to the throne also brought him closer to the web of secrets and betrayals that would one day end with his body on a basement floor. The 1950s were a golden age for organized crime in Chicago, and at the heart of it all stood Sam Giancana. By now, he was no longer the rising star, he was the man in charge, the undisputed boss of the outfit. His rise to power had been steady, deliberate, and perfectly timed. Tony Accardo, tired of the day-to-day heat of running the outfit, stepped into a quieter, advisory role, leaving Sam to handle the daily operations. This transition was not a bloody coup but a passing of the torch. Sam had earned it, and everyone knew it. With Sam at the helm, the outfit entered one of its most profitable and influential periods. Chicago was his city now, a place where every major racket, from gambling to loan sharking to labor unions, ultimately paid tribute to him. Politicians took his calls, judges looked the other way, and police officers learned to tread carefully. If someone wanted to open a casino, run a numbers racket, or move a shipment of contraband through the city, they needed Sam's blessing. And when Sam gave his blessing, he expected his cut. Under Giancana's leadership, gambling became the outfit's lifeblood. From illegal casinos hidden behind legitimate fronts to bookmaking operations spread across the city, the money flowed like a river. Sam was a master organizer. He streamlined operations, cut out inefficiency, and made sure profits were collected promptly. He also kept everyone in line. If someone tried to skim too much or go independent, they received a quiet visit, and if that didn't work, they received a permanent solution. But Sam wasn't just about muscle. He was about vision. He saw opportunities that others might have overlooked. He expanded the outfit's influence into labor unions, gaining control over trucking, construction, and other industries that gave him leverage over legitimate businesses. With union power came political influence, the kind that could swing elections, secure city contracts, and protect the outfit's interests at every level. Sam understood that true power wasn't just about fear, it was about being untouchable. Chicago in the 1950s reflected this new era of underworld sophistication. Gone were the days of street gunfights and high-profile bloodshed that had defined Capone's era. Instead, the outfit operated with a quiet, corporate efficiency. Decisions were made in private dining rooms, not in alleys. Men in tailored suits and polished shoes discussed millions of dollars over plates of pasta, while waiters pretended not to hear. Sam thrived in this world. He was charming, quick-witted, and could disarm even a wary business partner with a laugh, but beneath that charisma was a steel edge that no one dared test. It was during this period that Sam's name began to carry weight far beyond Chicago. Las Vegas had become the outfit's cash cow, and Sam played a major role in overseeing operations there. Outfit associates skimmed millions from casino profits, money that never saw the books, and sent it back to Chicago. It was a perfect arrangement. Vegas glowed with glamour and excitement, while Chicago quietly grew richer in the shadows. Sam personally traveled to Las Vegas often, staying in luxury suites, meeting with casino managers, and making sure everything ran smoothly. He loved the energy of Vegas, the showgirls, the high rollers, the neon lights, but he never forgot that it was ultimately business. Sam's reach extended even further. The outfit was involved in international gambling operations, narcotics trafficking, and even business ventures in Havana, Cuba, before Castro's revolution. Chicago's influence stretched from coast to coast, and Giancana was at the center of it all. He had become the kind of boss who could pick up the phone and have something happen in Los Angeles, Miami, or New York. For a man who had grown up in poverty, it was the ultimate transformation, from a barefoot boy in the patch to a king who ruled an empire. Of course, power of this magnitude did not go unnoticed. Federal law enforcement agencies were becoming more aggressive, especially under the leadership of Attorney General Robert Kennedy in the early 1960s. But in the 1950s, Sam still enjoyed a remarkable degree of freedom. He was often under surveillance, but the FBI struggled to pin anything substantial on him. Informants were too scared to talk, and those who did sometimes ended up disappearing. Giancana's ability to avoid conviction earned him a reputation similar to what John Gotti would later be called, the Teflon Don. Nothing stuck. Sam's charisma was a big part of his success. He could walk into a nightclub, shake hands, tell a few jokes, and make everyone feel like they were in on something special. He had a magnetic presence that drew people in, from politicians to entertainers to ordinary working men. At the same time, he knew how to use fear without overusing it. Violence, to Sam, was a tool, one to be used sparingly and effectively, not recklessly. This approach kept the outfit running smoothly. But while the money was good and the power intoxicating, there were always cracks forming beneath the surface. Rivalries simmered within the outfit, jealousies that could turn deadly. Some resented Sam's style, feeling he was too flashy, too willing to mingle with Hollywood stars and high society figures. Others worried that his growing profile was attracting too much attention to an organization that preferred to remain invisible. For now, though, Sam was secure. His alliances were strong, his enemies were either eliminated or kept in check, and his name inspired both admiration and fear. At night, Sam would sometimes host elaborate dinners at his favorite restaurants, surrounded by loyal lieutenants and trusted friends. The wine flowed, the food was exquisite, and the conversations were a mix of business, gossip, and laughter. These gatherings were more than social occasions, they were meetings of state for Chicago's shadow government. Every major decision, every dispute, every plan for expansion passed across the table. The golden era of the outfit under Sam Giancana was marked by a strange balance, a city where crime was everywhere but rarely seen, where the average citizen could live their life in peace as long as they didn't cross the wrong people. It was, in some ways, a quieter kind of rule than Capone's bloody reign. And yet, beneath that calm surface, danger always lurked. This was Sam at the height of his power, wealthy, connected, feared, and untouchable. But history has a way of turning. The very things that made Sam successful, his charisma, his connections, his willingness to push boundaries, would soon begin to draw dangerous attention from forces even he couldn't control. The next phase of his life would take him from the backrooms of Chicago to the bright lights of Las Vegas and the secret corridors of Washington, D.C., where politics and organized crime would collide in ways that would change everything. If Chicago was the heart of Sam Giancana's empire, Las Vegas was its glittering crown jewel. By the mid-1950s, Vegas was no longer just a desert outpost, it had become a neon paradise where mob money flowed through the casinos like an endless river. Sam adored Las Vegas, not just for the money it made him, but for the theater of it all, the spinning roulette wheels, the ringing of slot machines, the shimmering costumes of showgirls stepping into the spotlight. It was a city built for men like him, men who lived large, spent big, and expected everyone to know it. When Sam arrived in Vegas, he did not sneak in quietly. He was greeted like royalty. Suites in the Sands or the Tropicana were always ready for him, the best tables at the restaurants were waiting, and the casino bosses knew that when Giancana was in town, business had to be perfect. He would stroll the casino floors late at night, a cigarette in one hand, a drink in the other, scanning the tables like a king surveying his court. Dealers nodded respectfully. High rollers whispered when they saw him. He didn't need bodyguards to announce his presence, everyone simply knew. Sam's influence stretched far beyond the casinos themselves. He controlled the skimming operations that took millions off the top before the profits ever reached the counting rooms. The outfits cut was shipped back to Chicago, usually hidden in suitcases, sometimes literally in cash-stuffed envelopes. The system was so efficient it became legendary among mob families. Vegas was the outfit's cash cow, and Sam made sure it stayed that way. But Vegas was not just about business. It was about glamour, and Sam was drawn to glamour like a moth to a flame. He cultivated friendships with celebrities, especially Frank Sinatra and members of the Rat Pack. Sinatra, who was himself no stranger to mob rumors, seemed to genuinely like Sam. They were seen together often, dining, drinking, and laughing late into the night. Through Sinatra, Sam gained access to Hollywood's most exclusive circles, meeting actors, singers, and producers who saw him not just as a gangster but as a fascinating, charismatic man with a sharp wit and a taste for the good life. It was a strange balancing act, being both a feared mob boss and a charming companion to some of the biggest stars in America. Sam knew how to play both roles. At a cocktail party, he could tell jokes, swap stories, and put people at ease. But everyone also knew there was a line they could never cross. Beneath the tailored suit and easy smile, there was still the man who had survived the alleys of Chicago, the man who could be terrifying when provoked. Hollywood loved a good gangster story, and Sam was living proof that reality could be more compelling than fiction. Rumors swirled about him, some true, some exaggerated, and Sam didn't mind. The more people talked, the more his legend grew. There were whispers about actresses who had been romantically linked to him, about secret meetings with movie producers, about parties that went on until dawn. For a man who had once grown up in poverty, this was a dream realized. He was not just powerful, he was glamorous, a figure whose life felt larger than life itself. But fame came at a cost. The more visible Sam became, the more attention he attracted from law enforcement. The FBI had already been watching him closely, but now the press was watching too. Photographers tried to catch pictures of him with Sinatra or Dean Martin, and newspapers ran stories about his Vegas visits. Sam enjoyed the attention, but some of the older members of the outfit worried that he was becoming too public. They preferred the old way, staying in the shadows, letting others take the spotlight. Sam, however, seemed to thrive under it. Even in Chicago, Sam brought some of that Vegas glamour home with him. He began hosting lavish parties, where politicians, entertainers, and businessmen would mingle in smoke-filled rooms, drinking expensive liquor and discussing everything from deals to gossip. These gatherings were more than parties, they were opportunities to strengthen alliances, to remind everyone that Sam Giancana was not just a gangster but a man of influence, someone whose reach extended from the backstreets of Chicago to the lights of the Vegas Strip and the soundstages of Hollywood. And yet, there was always a darker edge to this glamorous world. Behind the laughter and music, there were whispered threats, quiet payoffs, and the ever-present risk of betrayal. The same charm that drew people to Sam could also make them dangerously curious. Reporters began digging into Vegas skimming operations. Federal agents stepped up their surveillance. Every glamorous night was also a reminder that the higher he rose, the harder he could eventually fall. Still, for a time, Sam seemed unstoppable. He embodied the idea that a man could come from nothing and rise to sit at the same table as the most famous entertainers in America. He was, in many ways, living a version of the American dream, just a darker, more dangerous one. And like many dreams, it could not last forever. Vegas was a stage where Sam played the role of the king, but off-stage, forces were gathering that would pull him into an even more dangerous world, the world of politics and espionage. Soon, Sam's life would intersect with the CIA in ways that seemed almost unbelievable: secret meetings, covert operations, and plans to change the course of history. The glamour of Vegas would fade into the shadows of the Cold War, and Sam Giancana, the charming Don, would find himself in the middle of a game far bigger than even the outfit could control. By the early 1960s, the world had entered a new kind of war, one fought not just on battlefields, but in shadows, whispers, and clandestine meetings. The Cold War was at its height, and the United States was obsessed with stopping the spread of communism. At the center of this global chess match stood Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida, now under the control of Fidel Castro, a charismatic revolutionary who had overthrown a U.S.-backed regime. For Washington, Castro was more than a problem, he was a threat. And when governments are desperate, they sometimes turn to unlikely allies. This was how Sam Giancana, the Chicago mob boss, found himself recruited, not officially, not publicly, but secretly, into one of the most audacious covert plots in American history. The Central Intelligence Agency, America's premier spy network, allegedly reached out to the outfit to help with a job no one could admit to: the assassination of Fidel Castro. The very idea sounded like something from a crime novel. The government, sworn to uphold the law, turning to organized crime to do its dirty work. But in the logic of the Cold War, it made a certain sense. The mob hated Castro. His revolution had closed down their casinos and gambling operations in Havana, costing them millions. The CIA needed people who could operate outside the law, people who could make things happen without leaving fingerprints. Sam and the outfit were perfect. The meetings were arranged quietly, often in hotel suites or safe houses far from prying eyes. Present at some of these meetings were CIA operatives, mob representatives, and sometimes middlemen who could keep things at arm's length. Sam was said to be intrigued by the offer. Not only was there money involved, but there was also the thrill of working on something bigger than the usual rackets. This was international intrigue, a chance to play a part in shaping history. The plots themselves ranged from the clever to the bizarre. There were schemes to poison Castro's food or drink, to slip him a toxin-laced cigar, even to make his famous beard fall out so he would lose face with his followers. Some plans sounded almost cartoonish, but others were deadly serious. For Sam, the important thing was that his organization was being paid and that his contacts in Havana were back in play. If Castro could be removed, maybe the mob's Havana casinos could reopen, and the river of money could flow again. But working with the CIA came with risks. These were not street thugs or rival gangsters, these were government men, trained in deception, with layers of secrecy that made the outfit's code of silence look simple by comparison. Sam had to be careful. He could not let anyone in Chicago suspect he was working with the government, not even his closest allies. To the outside world, he remained the same old Giancana, running gambling operations, hosting dinners, keeping the outfit's machine humming. But behind closed doors, he was playing a double game. It is tempting to imagine Sam in those moments, sitting in a hotel room with a drink in his hand, listening as a CIA man in a gray suit outlined the latest plan. The room would be quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. Sam, leaning back in his chair, would nod slowly, maybe crack a small smile. The risk didn't scare him. If anything, it excited him. He had always believed he was more than just another mob boss. Now, he was proving it. This secret alliance also gave Sam leverage. If the government needed him, then he was important, maybe even untouchable. It was the ultimate protection, or so he might have thought. But in the world of espionage, alliances are temporary, and loyalties last only as long as they are useful. The CIA plots against Castro, collectively known as Operation Mongoose, continued through the early 1960s, but none succeeded. Castro survived, miraculously, some said, attempt after attempt. Each failure was a reminder that even the combined power of the U.S. government and the mob could not guarantee results. And with each failure, the risk of exposure grew. Meanwhile, the Kennedy administration was increasing its crackdown on organized crime. Robert F. Kennedy, the Attorney General, made it his personal mission to bring down mob bosses across the country, including Giancana. This was an irony almost too rich. On one hand, the government was using Sam to try to kill Castro, and on the other, they were trying to put him in prison. The pressure mounted. FBI surveillance on Sam intensified. His phones were tapped, his meetings watched, his home bugged. Still, he carried on, moving between Chicago, Las Vegas, and Washington circles with remarkable confidence. Those close to him noticed he had grown more careful, more secretive. Perhaps he knew that the walls were closing in. Perhaps he believed that his CIA connection still gave him a measure of safety. But this was a dangerous dance. The deeper Sam became involved in these covert plots, the more secrets he held, secrets that could embarrass powerful people if they ever came to light. And secrets are dangerous things in the underworld. They are valuable, but they can also get you killed. There is a strange calm in this part of Giancana's story, as though history itself were holding its breath. On the surface, things went on as usual, the outfit kept making money, the casinos kept running, the dinners kept happening. But beneath that surface, something was shifting. Sam had stepped beyond the world of organized crime into something larger, something that connected him to global politics and international espionage. It is here that the seeds of his eventual downfall may have been planted. Because once you play in the shadows of government power, you are no longer just a gangster. You are a liability, a man who knows too much. And in the secret world, men who know too much rarely die of old age. As the 1960s moved forward, Sam would find himself more entangled than ever, with the Kennedys, with the CIA, with forces far beyond Chicago. Each connection made him more powerful but also more vulnerable. The man who had once been untouchable was beginning to attract too much light, and in the world Sam lived in, too much light could be fatal. By the dawn of the 1960s, Sam Giancana was not just a Chicago boss, he was a man whose reach extended into the highest levels of American politics. The presidential election of 1960 had been one of the closest in U.S. history. John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon were separated by razor-thin margins in several key states, none more important than Illinois. To this day, historians and journalists debate whether the Chicago outfit, and by extension, Sam Giancana, played a decisive role in delivering Illinois, and therefore the presidency, to Kennedy. The story goes that Joe Kennedy, patriarch of the Kennedy family and a man with deep connections of his own, reached out to Giancana for help. The outfit had influence over Cook County's Democratic machine, and with that influence came the ability to turn out votes, or make certain votes disappear. Whether Sam agreed out of respect for Joe Kennedy, out of a desire to see Nixon defeated, or simply because he saw an opportunity for leverage, no one can say for sure. But when Kennedy won Illinois by just over 8,000 votes, many whispered that Giancana's hand had tipped the balance. For Sam, this was more than just business. It was proof that he had ascended to a place where even presidents might owe him something. The thought must have been intoxicating, the boy from the patch, once chased through alleys by cops, now indirectly shaping the course of history. And for a while, it seemed like this strange alliance might benefit both sides. There was also the matter of Judith Campbell Exner, the glamorous socialite who reportedly became the bridge between Kennedy and Giancana. Judith was elegant, beautiful, and magnetic, the kind of woman who could effortlessly move between Hollywood parties and political fundraisers. She became romantically involved with JFK, and according to later testimony, she also carried messages between the president and Giancana. Whether those messages were about politics, organized crime, or covert operations is still debated, but the connection was there. Imagine those moments, Judith walking into a room where Sam was waiting, her heels clicking softly on the tile floor, carrying an envelope or a whispered message. Sam leaning back, cigarette in hand, a half-smile playing across his face. It must have felt like the world had tilted in his favor. He was no longer just a mob boss, he was a power broker, a man who could influence the highest office in the land. But politics is fickle, and alliances can shift with the wind. Once Kennedy was safely in the White House, the tone began to change, especially with Robert F. Kennedy, the new Attorney General. Robert was fiercely determined to wage war on organized crime, and Giancana quickly became one of his prime targets. Wiretaps were ordered, grand juries were convened, and federal agents began tailing Sam everywhere he went. This must have felt like betrayal of the highest order. Sam had believed that his efforts in the 1960 election had bought him protection, or at least goodwill. Instead, the Kennedy administration turned its full legal arsenal against him. In Giancana's mind, this was not just a crackdown, it was personal. The tension between Sam and the Kennedys created an almost Shakespearean drama. Here was a man who believed he had helped make a president, now hunted by that president's own brother. The FBI's relentless surveillance frustrated and humiliated him. At one point, agents even followed him into restaurants and sat nearby, listening as he dined. Sam, ever the showman, reportedly made a joke of it, ordering extra plates and sending them over to the FBI men, telling them to enjoy their dinner since they were going to be there anyway. But beneath the humor, there was growing resentment. The pressure was affecting his operations. Associates were nervous, meetings had to be moved constantly, and the threat of indictments loomed over everything. Sam's paranoia deepened, and his temper became more volatile. He was used to controlling the game, but now the rules had changed, and the players on the other side were not afraid of him. Judith Campbell Exner's position became more precarious as well. The affair between her and Kennedy became a potential liability, a scandal waiting to explode. For Sam, who had been romantically involved with Judith himself, this added another layer of tension. It was no longer just about politics or business, it was personal. The triangle between Sam, Judith, and JFK has been the subject of endless speculation, but what is certain is that it added fuel to an already combustible situation. The early 1960s were a turning point. For the first time, Sam's world, the world of mobsters, casinos, and whispered deals, collided directly with the world of national politics and federal power. It was a collision that could not last forever. One side would have to give. At night, perhaps alone with a drink, Sam might have replayed the events in his mind. He had helped Kennedy, or so he believed. He had worked with the CIA. He had played the game better than anyone else. And now they were trying to bring him down. The thought must have burned inside him. He was not a man who forgave easily, and betrayal was something he never forgot. This period of Sam's life is one of contrasts. On one hand, he was still at the height of his power, still feared and respected. On the other, he was under siege, his every move scrutinized, his private life invaded. It was as if two spotlights were now fixed on him, one from the glamour of his Vegas Hollywood connections, and one from the relentless glare of federal investigators. The pressure would only grow from here. The 1960s were a turbulent decade for America, assassinations, civil rights struggles, the Vietnam War, and in the midst of it all, Sam Giancana's world was becoming more dangerous than ever. The alliances that had once seemed like shields were now double-edged swords. And as history would soon show, Sam's story was about to turn darker, more paranoid, and far more deadly. Behind the legend of Sam Giancana, the feared boss, the man who could shut down Chicago with a phone call, there was a man who craved love, loyalty, and control in equal measure. Power came naturally to him, but intimacy was more complicated. His personal life was as turbulent as the streets he ruled, filled with passion, betrayal, laughter, and heartbreak. To understand Giancana fully, one has to step away from the smoke-filled backrooms and casino floors and walk into his living room, into his kitchen, into the quiet moments where the man beneath the title revealed himself. Sam was married young to his childhood sweetheart, Angelina Ange Detolve. By all accounts, she was a warm and steady presence in his life, a woman who tried to keep him grounded even as he became more deeply involved in the outfit. Together they had 3 daughters, and for a time, Sam played the role of the family man. He adored his children, and in those rare moments when he was home, he could be surprisingly gentle, telling them stories, sharing meals, making them laugh. There are accounts of him being a doting father, bringing gifts home, insisting that his daughters be given the best. But the demands of the life were constant, and the shadows often followed him home. Sam could be affectionate, yes, but he could also be moody and volatile, prone to long absences, late-night calls, and mysterious trips that he never explained. Ange put up with it for years, but the strain grew heavier. His world was dangerous, and danger has a way of seeping through doors no matter how tightly they are shut. Eventually, the marriage collapsed. Ange took the girls and left, unable to live with the constant stress and fear. For Sam, this was a wound he rarely spoke about, but those close to him said he never truly got over it. After his divorce, Sam's personal life became more complicated, more public. He was a man who loved women, and women seemed to love him back. He dated actresses, singers, and socialites, some of them openly, others in secret. One of his most famous relationships was with singer Phyllis McGuire, of the popular McGuire Sisters trio. Phyllis was glamorous, talented, and captivated by Sam's charisma. Their affair became the stuff of tabloid headlines, a forbidden romance between a wholesome American songbird and the most powerful mob boss in Chicago. Sam was intensely jealous, however, and his love often came with possessiveness. Friends recalled that he could go from charming to furious in an instant if he felt disrespected or suspected betrayal. There were arguments, dramatic reconciliations, and scenes that could have been lifted straight from a noir film. For all his ruthlessness in business, Sam seemed to have a softer, almost fragile side when it came to the women he loved. He wanted devotion, exclusivity, and control, and when he didn't get it, his temper could flare like a storm. Yet there was also a romantic side to him. He loved music, especially the big band sounds of the 1940s and 50s, and he would sometimes serenade the women in his life or take them dancing late into the night. He appreciated beauty, not just in people but in the world around him, good food, expensive wine, tailored suits, fast cars. Sam lived big because he had started with nothing. Perhaps he feared that if he slowed down, it might all slip away. Even his friendships had a personal intensity. He was fiercely loyal to those he considered part of his inner circle, showering them with gifts, favors, and protection. But that loyalty came with a price. Betrayal was not tolerated. If someone crossed him, even a close friend, the response could be swift and brutal. This was the paradox of Sam Giancana, a man who could laugh with you at dinner and order your death before dessert if he felt betrayed. At home, in quieter moments, he sometimes showed flashes of vulnerability. He missed his daughters, missed the sense of family that had once anchored him. Those who saw him in these moods said he could grow quiet, almost melancholy, sitting alone at the kitchen table late at night, nursing a drink and staring into the distance. It was as if the weight of everything he had built, and everything he had lost, pressed down on him all at once. This human side of Giancana is what makes his story more than just a tale of crime and power. He was not simply a villain, he was a man who loved deeply, laughed loudly, and hurt profoundly. His life was not just about money or control, it was about trying to fill the spaces left empty by hardship, poverty, and betrayal. In a strange way, that made him relatable, even sympathetic, to those who knew him well. But as the 1960s wore on, the pressures of the outside world crept closer. The FBI's relentless surveillance, the outfit's internal tensions, and the growing heat from Washington meant that Sam's private life became more exposed, more dangerous. Every phone call could be tapped, every meeting photographed, every woman in his life scrutinized. The walls were closing in, and the quiet moments of domesticity became rarer and rarer. It is tempting to imagine Sam in those final years of his prime, a man sitting in a dimly lit living room, perhaps with a record spinning softly on the turntable, the music filling the space around him. Outside, the city slept, but Sam was awake, thinking, planning, worrying. For all his power, he must have felt a creeping sense that time was running out, that the life he had built was beginning to crack. And as history would soon show, those cracks would only widen. The next chapter of Sam Giancana's life would be marked by growing paranoia, intensifying FBI pressure, and betrayal from places he never expected. The man who had once seemed untouchable was about to discover that even kings can fall, and when they do, they often fall hard. By the mid-1960s, the man who once seemed invincible was beginning to live in the long shadow of fear. Sam Giancana had weathered federal investigations before, but never like this. The Kennedy Justice Department had declared war on organized crime, and even after John Kennedy's assassination, the pressure did not let up. The FBI's relentless campaign against him was personal, almost obsessive. They bugged his phones, tapped his associates, planted listening devices in his favorite restaurants, and kept him under near constant surveillance. Every time Sam stepped out of his house, there was a car following him. Every time he sat down to dinner, a stranger might be listening. At first, Sam played it cool. He had always been good at brushing off attention, laughing at the feds who trailed him. But over time, the weight of constant observation began to wear him down. Imagine living a life where every conversation might be recorded, where every laugh, every whisper, every deal is potentially being heard by someone you can't see. Even for a man as seasoned as Giancana, this was unnerving. Friends began to notice changes. Sam became more cautious, more withdrawn. He would cut off conversations abruptly if he suspected a room was bugged. He refused to use certain phones, preferring face-to-face meetings in places he believed were safe. Sometimes he would drive aimlessly for hours, just to make sure he wasn't being followed, doubling back through side streets, circling blocks, checking rearview mirrors until he was satisfied. The man who had once been the life of the party now seemed jumpy, his temper shorter, his trust thinner. This paranoia was not unfounded. The FBI had installed some of the most sophisticated surveillance equipment of the era to monitor him. Conversations were transcribed, coded, filed away. The Bureau wanted to catch him talking about murder, extortion, or the CIA plots they knew he had been involved in. Sam had built his empire on silence. The outfit's code, omerta, was its shield, but now even silence seemed unsafe. Inside the outfit, tensions were also rising. Sam's leadership had made them rich, but some of his allies were growing restless. They worried that his high-profile lifestyle, the Vegas trips, the celebrity friendships, the tabloid scandals, had brought too much heat. The outfit had always preferred bosses who kept a low profile, men like Tony Accardo, who ruled quietly from the background. Sam was different. He enjoyed the spotlight, and that made him a liability. Rumors began to circulate. Some claimed Sam was getting too cozy with government men, that his connection to the CIA might mean he was sharing too much. Others whispered that he was keeping too much of the Vegas skim for himself. In the underworld, whispers are dangerous things. They can erode trust, fracture alliances, and start wars. Sam responded the only way he knew how, by tightening his circle and doubling down on control. Associates who showed signs of wavering loyalty were quietly warned, and in some cases, quietly removed. Safehouses became more important than ever. He began holding meetings in odd hours, in secluded locations, sometimes outdoors where microphones would be harder to hide. His life became a chess game played in the dark, every move calculated, every word measured. But paranoia has a way of feeding itself. The more careful Sam became, the more suspicious he grew. He began to question even those closest to him. Who could he really trust? Who might be talking to the feds? Who might be plotting behind his back? These questions kept him awake at night, pacing the floor, staring out windows into the darkness. The psychological toll was heavy. Some nights, Sam would sit alone in his kitchen, a drink untouched in front of him, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, and wondering who might be listening to him at that very moment. The walls seemed to close in. The house that had once been a sanctuary now felt like a cage. Even his temper, once a controlled weapon, became more unpredictable. Small slights could set him off. An associate arriving late to a meeting might find himself on the receiving end of a tirade. A rumor of betrayal could lead to violent retribution. Fear had made Sam more dangerous, but also more vulnerable. A man constantly on edge makes mistakes, and mistakes in the mob world can be fatal. Meanwhile, law enforcement was closing in from all sides. The FBI's files on Giancana grew thicker by the month. Federal prosecutors were preparing cases, hoping to finally put him behind bars. His name appeared regularly in newspapers, his every move speculated on by reporters and columnists. The public was fascinated by him, but fascination was cold comfort. Fame had become a spotlight, and under that spotlight, Sam could feel himself sweating. It is here, in this period of Giancana's life, that the story turns dark and claustrophobic. The man who had once ruled Chicago with a grin and a wave was now surrounded by invisible walls. His empire was still vast, but it was beginning to feel hollow. He was still feared, still respected, but he was no longer untouchable. The wolves were circling, some wearing badges, others wearing the same sharp suits as the men who once called him boss. The paranoia was not just about survival, it was about legacy. Sam had built something extraordinary, but he feared it might all unravel before his eyes. He feared prison, feared betrayal, feared dying in a way that made him look weak. And most of all, he feared being forgotten, just another gangster whose name would fade as quickly as it had risen. As the 1960s drew to a close, Sam's life had become a pressure cooker. The FBI kept closing in, the outfit kept whispering behind closed doors, and Sam himself kept retreating into a smaller, more isolated world. Something had to give. The question was not if, but when, and how. Soon, that pressure would drive him into exile, away from the city he had ruled for so long. And when he returned, the Chicago he came back to would no longer be the same, and neither would he. In 1966, the pressure in Chicago finally became unbearable. The FBI's constant surveillance, the subpoenas, the growing suspicion within the outfit, it was all closing in on Sam Giancana. He had spent years playing cat and mouse with the law, but now the game had grown too intense. Sam made a decision that must have felt unthinkable for a man who had once ruled Chicago like a king. He left. Mexico became his refuge. For 7 years, Sam lived in Cuernavaca, a lush city south of Mexico City known for its warm climate, quiet streets, and secluded villas. On the surface, it was a beautiful exile. The air was cleaner, the nights calmer, and the distant hum of trouble in Chicago was replaced by the soft rustle of palm leaves and the echo of church bells. But beneath that surface calm, Sam was still very much a man on edge. His villa was elegant but guarded, its walls high and gates locked. He kept a small circle of loyal bodyguards with him, men who watched the roads, checked the cars, and scanned the faces of strangers. To live as a mob boss in exile was not to live freely. It was to live in a gilded cage, one where the bars were invisible but always present. Every knock at the door could bring news from Chicago. Every letter or phone call might carry rumors of betrayal. Sam tried to keep a routine. He would wake early, read the newspapers flown in from the United States, and pace the rooms of his villa as if trying to walk off the weight of worry. Sometimes he entertained guests, old friends, political figures, even fellow exiles, but more often he spent his days in quiet reflection. He played cards, he drank, he listened to music, but he could never quite shake the sense that he was being watched, even here. There is something haunting about imagining Giancana in those years, the man who once held Chicago in his fist now pacing under the Mexican sun, far from the neon lights of Vegas, far from the smoky backrooms where he once commanded respect. Exile is a strange thing. It keeps you safe, but it also erodes you. Each passing year must have felt like both a reprieve and a punishment. And yet, Sam was not forgotten. Back in Chicago, the outfit continued its operations, but it was no longer the same. Others had stepped up to fill the void. Power had shifted. Decisions were made without him. The empire he had helped build was moving on, and for a man like Sam, that was almost harder to bear than the FBI's surveillance. To be away from Chicago was to lose a piece of himself. Letters and messages kept him connected to his city, but they also kept his paranoia alive. He heard rumors that some in the outfit wanted him gone for good, that his exile might be permanent, not by geography, but by death. Whether these rumors were true or not hardly mattered. In Sam's mind, danger was everywhere. He began to believe that the only way to truly control his fate was to return. But return to what? Chicago was no longer the city he had left. The FBI was still waiting. Subpoenas still had his name on them. Federal prosecutors wanted him to testify about everything, the outfit's operations, the CIA plots, the Vegas schemes. And the outfit itself might not welcome him back with open arms. To them, Sam might now be a liability, a man who knew too much and had been gone too long. Still, something inside him must have longed for home. Perhaps it was pride, or stubbornness, or simply the pull of the place where it had all begun. In 1974, after years in exile, Sam was deported by the Mexican government back to the United States. Whether Mexico was tired of hosting him or whether American pressure had made his stay untenable, the result was the same: Sam was going home. The return was not triumphant. This was no king coming back to reclaim his throne. This was a man under subpoena, a man the government wanted to grill under oath about secrets that stretched from Chicago to Havana to Washington. The press followed him, snapping photos as he arrived back in Chicago, reporters shouting questions he refused to answer. The FBI was waiting too, ready to serve him with new demands to testify before a federal grand jury. Sam settled back into his Oak Park home, but the city felt different. The outfit was different. Many of his old allies were gone or had retired. Younger men were in charge now, men who did not owe him loyalty, men who might see him as a threat. Chicago had always been a city of shifting alliances, but now Sam found himself more isolated than ever. The walls of his house seemed to hold memories of another time, a time when the phones rang with good news, when his living room was full of laughter, when his kitchen table was a command post for an empire. Now, the phones rang with subpoenas, and the kitchen felt like a waiting room for something inevitable. Sam could have chosen to cooperate, to testify, to spill the secrets that would have made him a star witness in one of the most explosive cases in American history. But that was not Sam's way. Omerta, the code of silence, was his creed, and breaking it was unthinkable. If he talked, he would be a dead man anyway. And so he waited, refusing to testify, refusing to betray the life he had built, even as that life closed in around him. Night after night, he sat in that quiet house, the lights of Chicago glowing faintly in the distance, knowing that every day brought him closer to a reckoning. Whether it would come from the government, from the outfit, or from fate itself, he could not know. Exile had changed Sam Giancana. He was older now, more tired, perhaps more philosophical. But he was also still dangerous, still a man who carried secrets powerful enough to bring down giants. And that made him a target. The next chapter of his story would be his last, the final act in a life that had been equal parts power, ambition, and tragedy. The return to Chicago had set the stage, and soon, the curtain would fall in a way that shocked even those who thought they knew how mob stories ended. When Sam Giancana stepped back onto Chicago soil in 1974, it was not the return of a king but the arrival of a man stepping into a storm. The city he had once ruled felt colder, harder, less forgiving. He was older now, with gray at his temples and a heaviness in his step that hadn't been there before. The world had moved on while he was away, the outfit had reorganized, younger bosses had taken control, and Chicago's criminal empire was no longer waiting for him to reclaim the throne. His home in Oak Park became both a sanctuary and a cage. It was a comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood, far from the smoky clubs and bustling backrooms where he had once held court. But its walls seemed to listen, its windows seemed to watch. The FBI was still on him, agents parked on the street, cameras clicking as he came and went. They weren't just curious, they were waiting. The grand jury wanted Sam to testify about everything he knew, the outfit's operations, the Vegas scam, the CIA's assassination plots against Castro. For Giancana, these subpoenas were more than just legal documents, they were death warrants. If he talked, even a little, he would be violating the code of silence that had defined his life and career. To testify would mean betraying the men he had led, the friends he had buried, the very code he had lived by. And betrayal was something that could never be forgiven. But refusing to testify was not without risk. The government could jail him for contempt. The outfit could decide that he was a liability just for being alive. It was as though Sam had been placed in a vice, pressure coming from both sides, and with every passing day, the grip tightened. Those who saw him during this period noticed that he seemed quieter, more introspective. He still had flashes of his old charisma, could still crack a joke or tell a story that made a room laugh, but there was a shadow behind his eyes. He knew he was being squeezed. He knew that his enemies, both in government and in the underworld, were watching, waiting for him to make the wrong move. Some nights, he would entertain close friends at the house. They would share dinner, talk about old times, perhaps reminisce about the days when Sam ruled the outfit and money flowed like water. But those dinners had a different air now, a heaviness, a sense that they were no longer celebrations but farewells. Sam would sit at the head of the table, cigarette smoke curling around him, listening as much as he talked, measuring the loyalty of every man in the room. Outside the house, the streets were quieter, but they were not safe. There were whispers that some in the outfit wanted Sam gone before he had a chance to talk. Others insisted he would never betray them, that killing him would be unnecessary and reckless. The arguments went back and forth, but the fact that they were happening at all must have been enough to keep Sam awake at night. The FBI, too, kept up its campaign, hoping to break him down. Agents followed him to the grocery store, to church, to restaurants. They called him in for questioning, served him papers, tried to rattle him. But Sam remained silent, answering nothing, playing the part of the old-school gangster who would rather die than talk. And yet, there was a sense that time was running out. Each day brought him closer to his scheduled testimony before the grand jury. Each day brought new rumors, new pieces of information about who might be plotting what. The quiet streets of Oak Park felt tense, as though the whole neighborhood knew something was coming. One evening, Sam stood outside his house and looked up and down the block, as if taking it all in, the trees swaying softly, the faint sound of a radio playing somewhere, the lights glowing in the windows of neighboring homes. Perhaps he knew then that his days were numbered. Perhaps he felt the inevitability of it all. Still, he carried on as though life were normal. He cooked for himself, often making simple Italian meals, pasta, sausages, vegetables from the market. He liked to eat late, sometimes after midnight, sitting alone at the kitchen table, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. There was something almost ritualistic about these meals, as though they were a way of grounding himself amid the chaos. Friends said he seemed resigned, not exactly afraid but accepting of whatever might come. He had lived by the rules of the life, and now he would face whatever fate those rules demanded. Whether he feared betrayal from the outfit or assassination from some shadowy government hand, he never said. If he had suspicions, he kept them to himself. As the date of his testimony drew closer, the tension became almost unbearable. The FBI tightened its surveillance. Reporters hovered, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man at the center of so many rumors. Inside the outfit, decisions were being made, decisions that would determine whether Sam lived to take the witness stand or not. And then came June 19, 1975, the day that would seal Sam Giancana's fate and turn his story from legend into mystery. The stage was set, the players all in place. All that remained was for the final act to play out, and when it did, it would be as shocking as it was inevitable. The house in Oak Park stood silent that night, its windows glowing softly against the darkness. Somewhere inside, Sam was cooking himself dinner, preparing for another long, quiet night. He could not have known that within hours, his life would end in that very kitchen, that the walls around him, the ones that had sheltered him, watched over him, and perhaps even haunted him, would soon bear witness to one of the most famous mob murders in American history. The night of June 19, 1975, was warm and still in Oak Park. It was the kind of quiet suburban evening that lulled neighbors into comfort, windows cracked open, televisions humming softly in living rooms, sprinklers clicking in backyards. But inside the modest brick home at 1147 South Winona Avenue, a storm was gathering. Sam Giancana was alone that night. The house that had once been filled with voices, laughter, and the business of running an empire now held only the sounds of cooking. In the kitchen, the air smelled of sizzling Italian sausage. A frying pan sat on the stove, a few links browning slowly, filling the room with a familiar, almost comforting aroma. It was an ordinary scene, and that made what happened next all the more chilling. Sometime after 10 p.m., someone came to the back door. Whether Sam expected them is a question that has never been answered. There were no signs of forced entry. Some believe it was someone he knew, someone he trusted enough to let in. Perhaps they sat for a moment, exchanged words, maybe even shared a drink. Or perhaps there was no conversation at all, just a brief acknowledgement before the final act began. What is certain is that the first shot came from behind. A single bullet struck Sam in the back of the head, a clean, professional shot meant to drop him instantly. But the shooter wasn't finished. As Sam fell to the floor, 5 more bullets tore into him, 3 in the neck, 2 in the mouth. It was over in seconds. The man who had survived decades of gang wars, federal investigations, and international conspiracies was gone, lying face down in his own kitchen, the pan still on the stove, the sausages still cooking. The scene was grisly but eerily calm. There was no sign of struggle, no overturned chairs, no broken glass. Just the body. The blood pooling slowly on the cool tile floor, and the smell of dinner that would never be eaten. The silence that followed must have been deafening. Whoever had pulled the trigger slipped away into the night, leaving the house as quiet as they had found it. It was just past midnight when the world outside stirred again. A family member, checking on Sam, discovered the body. The sight must have been unforgettable. The powerful boss of the Chicago outfit, the man whose name had inspired fear for decades, now lifeless on the floor, his final moments spent not in a blaze of glory but in the solitude of a suburban kitchen. Word of the murder spread quickly, first through Oak Park, then through Chicago, and finally across the country. By morning, reporters had gathered outside the house, cameras flashing as FBI agents, detectives, and coroners came and went. Neighbors stood at their windows, whispering to one another, unable to believe that the quiet man down the street, the one they had seen mowing his lawn or walking to the store, had been gunned down like this. The police report was clinical, but the details told their own story. 6 bullets from a .22 caliber weapon. No sign of forced entry. No sign of theft. This was not a robbery. This was not random. This was a message. And the choice of shots, especially the ones to the mouth, suggested a symbolic meaning. In mob lore, shooting someone in the mouth can mean they talked too much, or that they were about to. It was as if someone had silenced Giancana forever, making sure that whatever secrets he held would never leave that kitchen. Speculation began immediately. Theories multiplied. Some said it was the outfit, tying up loose ends before Sam could testify. Others whispered about the CIA, about men in suits who didn't want the full truth about the Castro assassination plots to come out. Still others suggested it might have been personal, an old score settled after decades. But whoever did it, they did it with precision. There were no witnesses, no fingerprints, no suspects who could be made to talk. For a murder that happened in such a quiet neighborhood, it was executed with chilling efficiency. For many, the image of Giancana's death became the defining moment of his life, a perfect, if brutal, symbol of the world he had lived in. Power had protected him for years, but it could not protect him forever. The life he had chosen always had only a few possible endings, and this was one of them. Standing in that kitchen later, investigators must have felt the weight of the moment. The frying pan had gone cold by then, its contents forgotten. The room still smelled faintly of food and gunpowder, a strange combination that seemed to hang in the air like a ghost. Somewhere, perhaps not far away, the killer was already gone, melting back into the night, their job finished. For the outfit, the murder was a clean break. There would be no testimony, no grand jury revelations, no confessions that could bring down the organization. For the government, the case was a tragedy but also a dead end. The man who had been the bridge between the mob and the CIA had taken his secrets to the grave. And for Chicago, it was the end of an era. Sam Giancana's reign, full of glamour, danger, and intrigue, was over. The city he had ruled would go on, of course. New bosses would rise, new rackets would emerge. But something about Giancana's death felt final, as though a chapter in the city's underworld history had been closed forever. Even now, decades later, the image remains, a quiet kitchen, a pan of sausages on the stove, and a man lying face down, the silence heavy around him. It is a scene that invites endless questions, a mystery that still has the power to chill. The night had swallowed its secret, and no one who could speak would ever truly tell. The morning after Sam Giancana's murder, Oak Park was no longer the quiet suburb it had been the night before. Police cars lined the block, their red and blue lights flashing against the brick houses. Reporters crowded the sidewalks, cameras clicking, microphones ready to capture every statement. Neighbors stood on porches in their bathrobes, whispering about the man who had been gunned down just a few doors away. Inside the house, investigators moved carefully, photographing the scene, marking the shell casings, taking notes. The kitchen was eerily still, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The body had been taken away, but the blood stains remained, dark against the pale floor tiles. The frying pan, the sausages, the half-set table, they were all still there, frozen in time like props on a stage after the actors have left. The police had little to go on. There were no signs of forced entry, no stolen valuables, no neighbors who had seen or heard anything suspicious. Whoever had killed Giancana had done it cleanly and quietly. The murder weapon, a .22 caliber automatic, was never recovered. The shell casings offered no usable fingerprints. It was, in every sense, a professional hit. From the very start, the question was not just, who, but why. Investigators knew that Giancana had been scheduled to testify before a federal grand jury about CIA operations against Castro. He had been subpoenaed just weeks before his death. Was this murder meant to silence him before he could speak? The timing was suspicious, almost too perfect. The FBI quickly launched its own parallel investigation, separate from local police. They combed through their surveillance files, listened to hours of recorded conversations, and questioned anyone with ties to Giancana. But the outfit was silent. No one talked, and those who might have known something seemed either unwilling or too frightened to share. Then came the theories. The simplest, and perhaps most widely accepted, was that the Chicago outfit had ordered the hit. Giancana had been out of the game for years, and his return threatened to upset the delicate balance of power. Younger bosses, eager to consolidate control, might have decided that Sam was a liability, especially with his upcoming testimony. The shots to the mouth, some said, were a clear message: silence is sacred, and anyone who breaks it pays with their life. But not everyone was convinced it was that simple. Some pointed to the CIA connection. Giancana had been part of highly secret operations to assassinate Fidel Castro, operations that, if fully revealed, could embarrass the U.S. government at the highest levels. Killing him before he could testify might have been a way to protect those secrets. This theory was bolstered by the fact that the murder had the hallmarks of a professional operation, efficient, untraceable, and perfectly timed. Others still floated a third theory, that it was a combination of both. Perhaps the outfit and shadowy government figures had a shared interest in making sure Sam never took the stand. In the world Giancana inhabited, alliances of convenience were common, and nothing could be ruled out. Reporters had a field day. Newspapers across the country ran front-page stories, often with dramatic headlines: gangland-style slaying of Chicago boss, mob kingpin murdered days before testimony, mafia CIA link suspected in Giancana death. Television news broadcast images of the house, the street, the detectives carrying evidence bags. The murder became a national sensation, a real-life crime story that seemed to blur the line between fact and fiction. The investigation dragged on for months, but leads were scarce. The witnesses who might have talked either disappeared or changed their stories. The outfit closed ranks, and if the CIA had anything to hide, it remained buried under layers of classification. Eventually, the case went cold. No arrests were made. No charges were filed. Sam Giancana's murder became one more unsolved mystery in a city famous for them. For the FBI, it was a bitter outcome. They had spent years trying to bring Giancana down, and now he was gone, not in a courtroom, but in a hail of bullets. For them, justice had been denied. For the outfit, the killing removed a potential threat, but it also brought unwanted attention. Federal pressure intensified in the years that followed, as investigators sought to dismantle the organization piece by piece. For the public, the murder only deepened Giancana's legend. People were fascinated not just by his life but by the mystery of his death. Books were written, documentaries produced, each offering a different theory about who pulled the trigger and why. Some insisted it was the mob, others swore it was the government, and still others believed it was something more personal, a betrayal by someone he had trusted completely. The Oak Park kitchen became almost mythic in the telling. Tourists sometimes drove past the house just to catch a glimpse. True crime writers lingered on the detail of the frying pan, the sausages left behind, the symbolic shots to the mouth. It was as if the scene itself had become part of the folklore, a reminder that even the most powerful men could meet their end in the most ordinary of places. What makes Giancana's murder so haunting is not just the violence but the silence that followed. No confession, no trial, no final word on who had given the order. Just a mystery, hanging in the air like smoke, refusing to clear. For some, that silence is the perfect ending to his story, a man who lived by secrecy, dying in secrecy, his final secrets buried with him. But for others, the unanswered questions remain an itch that cannot be scratched. Did Giancana know his killer? Did he let them in willingly, thinking they were a friend? Or was it a stranger, a cold professional who never said a word? Was the order given in a Chicago backroom, or in a government office in Washington? Even now, nearly half a century later, the murder remains unsolved, the files gathering dust in evidence rooms, the truth known only to a handful of men, most of whom are likely gone themselves. And perhaps that is fitting. The world Sam Giancana came from was a world where truth was always hidden, where answers were always just out of reach. The kitchen in Oak Park may be quiet now, but its silence is heavy with all the things that were never said. And as we turn the page to the next chapter of Sam's story, the mystery lingers, pulling us deeper into the shadowy legacy he left behind. When the news of Sam Giancana's murder spread through Chicago's underworld, it sent a chill through every backroom, every social club, every corner where the outfit still held sway. The man who had once been the face of Chicago organized crime, the boss who had brokered deals, expanded empires, and walked the tightrope between politics and power, was gone. And in his absence, there was a vacuum. The outfit had survived leadership changes before. It had weathered the end of the Capone era, the imprisonment of Frank Nitti, and the quiet retirement of Tony Accardo from day-to-day operations. But Giancana's death felt different. It was not a slow passing or a planned transition, it was a sudden, violent removal. For those inside the organization, it was both a warning and an opportunity. In the days after his murder, the outfit moved quickly to restore order. Meetings were called, territories reassigned, operations reorganized. The priority was stability, to show law enforcement, rivals, and their own associates that business would continue without interruption. Angelo, the Hook, La Pietra and Joseph Iappa, powerful figures in their own right, began consolidating control, stepping into the void that Giancana had left behind. Under Iappa's leadership, the outfit became more conservative, more careful. The flamboyance of Giancana's reign, the Las Vegas trips, the Hollywood connections, the celebrity friendships, gave way to a quieter, more businesslike approach. Iappa and his successors preferred to keep the organization under the radar, running it more like a corporation than a crime family. The goal was simple: make money, avoid headlines. Chicago itself was also changing. The 1970s brought new challenges: rising law enforcement pressure, increased federal funding for organized crime investigations, and the emergence of rival ethnic gangs. The outfit was no longer the only game in town, and competition meant they had to adapt. They diversified their rackets, expanded into suburban operations, and became even more deeply entrenched in union control. But there was a lingering sense of unease. Giancana had been larger than life, a figure whose very name could inspire fear or respect. His absence left a psychological void as much as a practical one. Some outfit members who had been loyal to Sam found themselves marginalized or pushed aside. Others breathed easier, relieved that his flashy leadership, which many believed had attracted too much federal attention, was finally over. For law enforcement, Giancana's death was a double-edged sword. On one hand, the man they had spent years surveilling was gone, taking with him the potential for explosive testimony about the CIA plots and the outfit's operations. On the other hand, his murder only deepened the federal government's resolve to bring down the Chicago mob. Task forces were formed, wiretaps expanded, and prosecutors focused on dismantling the outfit piece by piece. The Vegas skim operations, which had been a hallmark of Giancana's era, came under increasing scrutiny. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, federal investigations would lead to major indictments that exposed the outfit's control over several Las Vegas casinos. These cases would eventually send Iappa and other bosses to prison, marking the beginning of the outfit's slow decline. But in the immediate aftermath of Giancana's death, the city's underworld was a place of caution. People spoke in whispers. Deals were made more carefully. Even ordinary associates became more mindful of where they went and who they were seen with. Giancana's murder had reminded everyone of an old truth: no one, no matter how powerful, was untouchable. In the neighborhoods where Sam had once walked as a boy, the old-timers shook their heads and said it was the end of an era. The flashy boss who had dined with Sinatra, who had been rumored to sway presidential elections, was gone. The outfit that remained was still strong, still dangerous, but it was changing, becoming less a cast of colorful characters and more a shadowy machine. And for some, that was exactly how it should be. Giancana's life had been too loud, too public. His murder had been a final punctuation mark, a way of resetting the balance, reminding everyone that the outfit's first priority was survival, not celebrity. Still, his absence was felt. The kitchen where he had been killed became a symbol, not just of his death but of the shifting tides of organized crime. The man who had once ruled Chicago was now a cautionary tale, a reminder that power, if not handled carefully, could draw too much light and invite the very thing you feared most. In the quiet that followed his death, Chicago's mob settled back into its rhythm, but it was never quite the same. Giancana's era had been one of expansion and bold moves, a time when the outfit had reached beyond Chicago to touch Las Vegas, Cuba, and even Washington, D.C. Now, the focus turned inward, toward survival, toward keeping the machine running without attracting the kind of attention that had brought so much heat in the first place. It was, in many ways, the closing of a chapter. The age of the charismatic mob boss, the man who walked openly among the people and was as much a celebrity as a criminal, was ending. What replaced it was colder, more faceless, more bureaucratic, and perhaps more effective, at least for a time. But for those who remembered Giancana, for those who had seen him at his peak, there was a sense that something vital had been lost. Chicago would always have its underworld, but it would never again have a boss quite like Sam Giancana. In the years following Sam Giancana's death, the silence surrounding his murder became almost as famous as the murder itself. The police had no suspects. The outfit offered no explanations. And perhaps most conspicuously, the U.S. government, which had spent years investigating Giancana and had been preparing to put him on the witness stand, seemed strangely quiet. This silence invited questions, and questions invited speculation. The most persistent rumor was that Giancana had been killed not just because of what he had done, but because of what he knew. His upcoming grand jury testimony was supposed to cover a range of topics, including the Chicago outfit's gambling operations and his role in international plots. Among those plots was the CIA's now infamous effort to assassinate Fidel Castro, a covert campaign known as Operation Mongoose. For years, this connection between the mob and the CIA had been only a whisper, something denied or deflected whenever it was brought up. But as time passed, bits and pieces of the truth began to leak out. Declassified documents eventually confirmed that yes, the CIA had in fact sought the mob's help in eliminating Castro. And who better to approach than men like Giancana, who had once made millions running Havana's casinos before Castro's revolution shut them down. The documents painted a picture of a secret alliance that was both strange and strangely logical. The CIA had the motive: remove Castro and destabilize his regime, and the mob had the means, hitmen, connections in Cuba, and a willingness to get their hands dirty in ways the government could never admit to publicly. The partnership had been brokered through intermediaries to give the CIA plausible deniability, but everyone involved knew who was really pulling the strings. When these revelations began to surface years after Giancana's death, they cast his murder in a new and more sinister light. If Sam had gone before the grand jury and told everything he knew about Operation Mongoose, it would have been an international scandal. The idea that the U.S. government had conspired with organized crime to carry out political assassinations could have shaken public trust and embarrassed some of the most powerful figures of the era. Could it be that silencing Giancana served more than one purpose? That his death was convenient not only for the outfit but also for certain corners of the intelligence community? This theory has persisted for decades, and while there has never been hard proof, the timing was difficult to ignore. Even the Warren Commission, investigating President John F. Kennedy's assassination, had taken an interest in Giancana before his death. Some conspiracy theorists have gone further, suggesting that Giancana might have had knowledge linking elements of organized crime or intelligence agencies to the events in Dallas in 1963. Whether or not that is true, it only deepened the mystery. The CIA, for its part, has always denied any involvement in Giancana's murder. Officially, they acknowledge working with him on certain operations but insist they had no reason to want him dead. And yet, the public imagination remains unconvinced. The idea that a man could be at the intersection of the mob, the CIA, and the Kennedy family, and then be killed days before he was set to testify, is too compelling to dismiss. Over the years, journalists and researchers have tried to pry open the locked doors of history, filing Freedom of Information Act requests, digging through declassified files, interviewing aging operatives and mobsters. What they have uncovered are tantalizing fragments, memos, notes, vague references to meetings and payoffs. Enough to suggest that the truth is out there, but not enough to tell the full story. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of this chapter is that Giancana himself might have been preparing to tell it all. Some who were close to him said he was considering cooperation, not to betray the outfit but to set the record straight on his own terms, to shape his own legacy. Whether that is true will never be known, because the kitchen floor in Oak Park became the final page of his story. There is a strange stillness when thinking about this part of Giancana's life, as though history itself has chosen to keep certain secrets. The files may be open, but the full truth remains hidden between the lines, waiting for someone to connect the dots. And yet, perhaps that is the way Giancana would have wanted it. A man who lived by silence, who believed that some things should never be spoken, would not have wanted a simple ending. As the years passed, the CIA's role in Operation Mongoose became more widely known, but the question of how far they were willing to go, and whether that included eliminating a man like Sam Giancana, remains unanswered. It is one of those mysteries that refuses to fade, lingering like smoke in a closed room. For listeners, this part of the story feels like stepping into a darker room within an already shadowy house. The glamour of Las Vegas is gone, the laughter of the Rat Pack is silent, and we are left with a man who knew too much, a government that needed secrets kept, and a murder that solved one problem while raising 100 new ones. The CIA's silence, whether out of caution or complicity, has only fueled the legend. Sam Giancana is no longer just a figure of organized crime history, he is a character in the larger drama of Cold War intrigue, a man whose death sits at the crossroads of power, politics, and secrecy. And perhaps that is why we are still talking about him tonight. Because somewhere, hidden in the classified archives or in the memories of those who are no longer alive, is the truth about what really happened, and why. Until that truth comes out, Giancana's story will always carry with it the weight of mystery, inviting us to lean closer, to listen harder, to wonder. In the years after Sam Giancana's death, his legend only grew. The man who had once walked the streets of Chicago, larger than life and untouchable, became a figure of endless fascination for writers, filmmakers, and true crime enthusiasts. In many ways, death made Giancana even more famous than life ever had. The mystery of his murder, the secrets he took to the grave, and the aura of glamour that surrounded him turned him into a character that seemed tailor-made for storytelling. Books were the first to pick up the thread. Journalists and historians began digging into his life, piecing together his rise from the patch to the pinnacle of Chicago's outfit. Some of the earliest biographies focused on his criminal empire, the gambling rackets, the Vegas scam, the extortion networks, while later works explored his rumored ties to the Kennedys and the CIA. Each new account added another layer, another angle, another interpretation of who Giancana really was. Then came the memoirs. Perhaps the most famous was Double Cross, written by Giancana's half-brother, Chuck Giancana, which painted Sam as both a brilliant tactician and a dangerous man whose reach extended far beyond Chicago. The book claimed to reveal intimate family details, the private side of Sam's life that few had ever seen. It also tied him directly to some of the biggest events of the 20th century, including JFK's assassination, a claim that has fueled conspiracy theories ever since. Hollywood, of course, could not resist. Television specials and documentaries devoted entire episodes to Giancana's life. HBO's The Rat Pack dramatized his relationship with Frank Sinatra and the way Vegas became a playground for both celebrities and mobsters. True crime shows revisited his murder again and again, each time with ominous reenactments of the kitchen scene, the frying pan, the shots to the head and mouth. These portrayals made Sam a kind of ghost haunting the American imagination, forever tied to the image of a man who knew too much and paid the ultimate price. Even popular culture outside of documentaries found inspiration in him. Characters in mafia movies and television series often carried echoes of Giancana's persona, the charming but dangerous Don, the man who could smile while delivering a threat, the figure whose life straddled the line between respectability and ruthlessness. In many ways, Giancana helped shape the archetype of the modern mob boss that we see in shows like The Sopranos or films like Casino. But beyond the sensationalism, Giancana's story has been used to explore deeper themes about power, loyalty, and corruption. Historians point to him as an example of how organized crime became intertwined with American political and economic life in the mid-20th century. His connections to labor unions, casinos, and government operatives reveal a picture of a country where the line between the underworld and the legitimate world was thinner than most would like to admit. For Chicago, Giancana became part of the city's lore, another name on the long list of gangland figures who had shaped its history. Tour guides mention him alongside Al Capone when they talk about Chicago's mob past, and his Oak Park home became a place of curiosity, even pilgrimage, for those fascinated by mob history. There is also something undeniably cinematic about Giancana's life that keeps drawing people back. He was a man of contradictions, violent yet charming, feared yet magnetic, ruthless yet oddly loyal. His rise from poverty, his rule over Chicago, his entanglement with the CIA, and his violent end all read like the perfect crime epic, the kind of story that would feel too implausible if it were fiction. In a way, the myth of Sam Giancana serves as a mirror. People project onto him what they want to see. To some, he was a hero of sorts, a self-made man who clawed his way to the top in a world stacked against him. To others, he was a villain, a man who left a trail of bodies and fear in his wake. And to many, he was simply a mystery, a man who stood at the intersection of crime, politics, and espionage, a man whose death will never be fully explained. Late-night radio hosts still discuss his story, conspiracy theorists still debate his role in history, and true crime podcasts dedicate entire series to him. Each generation seems to rediscover Sam Giancana and find something new in his tale, a lesson, a warning, a fascination with the forbidden. Perhaps what keeps Giancana's story alive is not just the facts but the feeling it leaves behind. There is something both glamorous and haunting about him. His world was one of smoky clubs, whispered deals, sharp suits, and darker shadows, a world that feels distant now, but also strangely timeless. As you listen to his story in the quiet of the night, it is easy to picture him walking through that world again, stepping out of a black Cadillac in front of a nightclub, nodding to the doorman, smiling at the maitre d', taking his usual table where business and pleasure blended seamlessly. The music swells, the laughter rises, and for a moment, the ghost of Sam Giancana is alive again, larger than life, reminding us that legends never truly die. And when the music fades and the lights dim, we are left with that kitchen, that June night in Oak Park, and the unanswered questions that will likely never be resolved. It is in that tension, between myth and reality, between glamour and blood, that Sam Giancana's legacy continues to live, pulling us back into his story, again and again. As the story of Sam Giancana unfolds, one can't help but pause and reflect on what it all means. His life, filled with ambition, danger, and secrecy, is more than just the tale of a mob boss, it is a study of power, of loyalty, of the choices that shape a man and the price those choices demand. If there is a lesson in his rise and fall, it is not simple. It is layered, complex, and haunting, much like the man himself. At the heart of Giancana's story is the pursuit of power. From the streets of the Patch to the top of the Chicago outfit, Sam never stopped climbing. Power was not just a means to an end, it became the end itself. It gave him respect, wealth, and influence, but it also made him a target. The higher he rose, the narrower the ledge he stood on became. Every step upward brought more enemies, more suspicion, and more risk. In many ways, Giancana's life reminds us that power can be both intoxicating and corrosive. It can lift a man out of poverty, make him a king in his own city, and allow him to bend the world to his will. But it can also isolate him, turn friends into rivals, and attract the kind of attention that no amount of muscle can push away. Power, as Sam discovered, is never permanent. It must constantly be defended, and eventually, it will be taken, by rivals, by the law, or by fate. Loyalty, too, is a central theme. Giancana lived by a code, omerta, the code of silence, that demanded absolute loyalty and secrecy. He rewarded loyalty generously, protecting those who stood by him and providing for their families. But he also punished betrayal ruthlessly, sending a message that treachery was the one sin that could not be forgiven. And yet, in the end, it was loyalty itself that may have doomed him. By refusing to testify, by keeping the outfit's secrets even when doing so put him in mortal danger, Sam chose loyalty over survival. To some, that makes him a tragic hero, a man who stayed true to his code until the end. To others, it was a fatal flaw, a refusal to adapt, a choice that cost him his life. There is also a deeply human element to Giancana's story, the loneliness that came with his power. For all his charisma, for all the people who surrounded him at parties and dinners, Sam was often alone. He lost his marriage, struggled with trust, and lived much of his later life under the weight of paranoia. In this way, his story becomes a meditation on the cost of living in a world where trust is dangerous and love is fleeting. For listeners, there is something almost cautionary here. The life of Sam Giancana is often romanticized: the suits, the cars, the money, the glamour of Las Vegas and Hollywood. But beneath that surface lies a life of constant risk, constant fear, and constant calculation. Every friend could be a threat, every phone call could be a trap, every day could be the last. And yet, there is also something undeniably compelling about his determination. Sam refused to bend, even at the end. He would not be intimidated into testifying, would not betray the life that had given him everything. In a strange way, there is dignity in that, a man standing on principle, even as the shadows closed around him. Perhaps that is why his story resonates so strongly. It is not just about crime or conspiracy, it is about the human struggle to control one's destiny. Giancana was a man who wanted to write his own story, and for most of his life, he did. The tragedy is that the final chapter was written for him, in a kitchen on a June night, by someone whose name we will likely never know. For those lying awake, listening to this story as the night deepens, Giancana's life can feel like a parable. It asks quiet questions: how far would you go for power? How much would you sacrifice for loyalty? What would you risk to hold on to what you have built? And what would you be willing to lose before you let go? The answers are never easy. Giancana's choices led him to both greatness and destruction. His story is a reminder that every life, no matter how powerful, is fragile. Every empire, no matter how strong, can fall. And every secret, no matter how closely guarded, carries with it the possibility of being silenced forever. As we reflect on his life, we are left with a mix of admiration and sadness: admiration for the audacity of his climb, sadness for the inevitability of his fall. In the end, Giancana was not just a mob boss or a historical figure. He was a man, flawed, ambitious, brilliant, reckless, whose life holds a mirror up to the darker corners of human nature and asks us to look closely. And as the night grows quiet and the story lingers in the mind, perhaps that is the real power of Sam Giancana's legacy: not the money he made or the power he wielded, but the questions he leaves behind, questions that echo long after the last word is spoken. The story of Sam Giancana ends where it began, in the quiet of that Oak Park house, on a June night, with the smell of dinner still hanging in the air. It is impossible to tell his life without coming back here, to this moment, to this room where everything stopped. Even now, decades later, you can almost picture it: the small suburban kitchen, the linoleum floor, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the pan of sausages left behind as if time itself had been interrupted. Every detail of that night has been examined, debated, and retold, and yet the mystery remains. Who walked through that back door? Who stood behind Sam when the first shot rang out? Was it a man he trusted, perhaps even one who had sat at this very table before, sharing a meal or a drink? Or was it a stranger, a professional, cold and silent, there only to finish a job? The unanswered questions give the scene a ghostly weight. When investigators first arrived, they found no struggle, no forced entry, no sign of panic. Sam had not been caught off guard by a break-in. If anything, it seemed as though he had allowed his killer inside, perhaps even greeted them as a friend. That possibility makes the story even more chilling. Trust, for Sam, had always been a dangerous thing, and in the end, it may have been trust that killed him. The shots themselves tell their own story. 1 to the head, to drop him instantly. 3 to the neck, as if to make certain. 2 to the mouth, the most symbolic of all. In the language of the underworld, shooting a man in the mouth is an unmistakable message: he talked, or he was about to. Sam had lived by the code of silence, refusing to testify before the grand jury, but perhaps to those who ordered his death, even the possibility of him breaking that silence was too great a risk. Neighbors said they heard nothing. No gunshots, no shouting, no sound of struggle. The killer must have used a silencer, leaving the night as quiet as it had been before. Somewhere down the block, a dog may have barked, a sprinkler may have clicked on, but inside the house, there was only stillness. By morning, the stillness had turned to chaos. News trucks, reporters, FBI agents, all crowded the street. The house became a crime scene, the kitchen a place of endless speculation. Photographs were taken, evidence collected, but the most important piece, the identity of the killer, remained out of reach. And so the mystery began. The FBI was convinced the outfit was responsible, that they had silenced their former boss before he could take the stand. Outfit loyalists, on the other hand, swore that Sam had kept the code, that there was no need to kill him, that perhaps the government had removed a man who knew too much about secrets that were never meant to see daylight. Others still suggested that the murder may have been personal, that an old grudge had come due in the most violent way imaginable. Years turned to decades, and the case remained unsolved. The files grew dusty, witnesses passed away, and any man who might have once known the truth took it with him to the grave. The house was eventually sold, repainted, lived in by other families. Children played in the yard, unaware of the history in the kitchen. Time moved forward, as it always does, but the questions lingered, like faint echoes that refuse to fade. There is something fitting, perhaps, about the fact that Giancana's story ends in silence. He was a man who built his life around secrecy, who dealt in whispers and backroom conversations, who believed that some things should never be spoken aloud. That he should die without revealing his final secret, without naming names, without telling the story he was about to tell to a grand jury, feels like a dark kind of poetry. And yet, the lack of closure is what keeps the story alive. People are drawn to unsolved mysteries, to the puzzle pieces that never quite fit. Giancana's murder invites endless speculation, endless retelling, each version a little different than the last. Perhaps that is why his ghost still seems to walk through the imagination of anyone who hears his name. Close your eyes and imagine that kitchen one last time. The chair is tipped over, the floor marked with evidence tags, the faint smell of gunpowder still in the air. Outside, the street is quiet again. The neighbors have gone back inside. The reporters have packed up their cameras. The night has swallowed the noise, leaving only the memory of what happened here. This is where the story leaves us, not with answers, but with questions. Was it justice? Was it revenge? Was it something larger, something tied to history and power and politics? We will likely never know. And maybe that is what makes it so haunting. Because in the end, Sam Giancana's death is not just the story of a man. It is the story of an era, of Chicago's underworld at its most powerful, of the strange alliances between mobsters and governments, of the thin line between loyalty and betrayal. It is a story that ends not with a verdict but with a shadow, a reminder that some truths are meant to remain in the dark. And as the night deepens and the world grows still, the image of that quiet kitchen lingers, a final, unspoken chapter that leaves us listening for answers that will never come. The story of Sam Giancana ends not with the sound of gunfire, not with the shouts of police or the flash of cameras, but with quiet. Long after the reporters left Oak Park, long after the case went cold, Chicago settled back into its rhythm, a rhythm that Sam had helped shape but could no longer control. The city kept breathing, kept moving, kept shining its lights against the night sky. And somewhere, in that vast, living city, the memory of the man they once called Mooney became just another ghost in the long history of Chicago's streets. Picture the city tonight. The Loop is glowing, its towers lit like candles against the dark. The L train rattles softly overhead, carrying its late-night passengers home. Out by the lake, the water laps quietly against the shore, reflecting the moon in silver ripples. In the neighborhoods, the streets are hushed, curtains drawn, porch lights glowing faintly. The city that once trembled under Sam's power now sleeps without him, as if it has finally exhaled. And yet, if you listen closely, you can almost hear echoes of the past. The sound of jazz spilling from a club on Rush Street. The murmur of voices in a backroom, discussing business over plates of pasta. The soft click of a cue ball in a smoky pool hall. Somewhere in those echoes is Sam, his laugh low and knowing, his presence felt but unseen. There is a strange comfort in remembering him this way, not as the man lying in the kitchen, but as the man who ruled with a mix of charm and steel. For all the fear he inspired, Sam Giancana was a man who loved his city, who walked its streets, who knew every corner and alley and understood the pulse of the place in a way few ever have. He was part of its fabric, part of its shadow. And maybe that is why his story still matters. Because Chicago is a city built on stories, stories of immigrants, of ambition, of struggle and survival. Sam's story is one of those, just written in darker ink. It is the story of a boy who wanted more, who reached for power, who touched history, and who ultimately paid the price for living too close to the flame. As we close the final page of his story, there is no need to rush. Let the images settle, the bustling streets of the Patch, the neon glow of Las Vegas, the hushed rooms where politics and crime collided, the quiet of that last night. Each image is a piece of a life that was both extraordinary and inevitably human. Sam Giancana's legacy is complicated, as most legacies are. Some will remember him as a ruthless gangster, a man who spilled blood to protect his empire. Others will remember him as a visionary leader who expanded the outfit into something bigger than it had ever been. And still others will see him as a tragic figure, a man trapped between loyalty and survival, whose end was written the moment he chose to live by a code that could not bend. In a way, Sam's story is not so different from the stories told around kitchen tables everywhere, stories of ambition, of family, of betrayal, of love lost and found. The stakes were higher, the setting more dangerous, but at its core, it is a story about a man trying to shape his own destiny. That is why it resonates, why it lingers long after the last word. And so we leave him where we found him, in the quiet of the night. The city sleeps. The lights of downtown shimmer faintly through the haze. The wind coming off Lake Michigan carries with it the faint scent of rain. Somewhere, a train horn sounds in the distance, lonely and low, like a lullaby for a restless city. This is the perfect place to end, not with noise, but with stillness. Not with fear, but with reflection. Let Sam Giancana's story be what it is, a reminder of how high a man can climb, how far he can fall, and how, in the end, the night takes us all. As you drift toward sleep, imagine Chicago one last time, its skyline glowing, its streets quiet, its ghosts walking softly through the alleys. Among them is Sam, not the king he once was, not the man who died on a kitchen floor, but simply a figure fading into memory. His footsteps echo for a moment, then are gone. Good night, Chicago. Good night, Sam.